And people are increasingly coming forward with stories about federal agents unfairly confiscating their property. Civil assets forfeitures is a legal tool that many criticize as a violation of due process. Attorney Richard Friedman joins us to discuss this topic. Richard, welcome to Arise America. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Debbie.
Now, help me make sure that I understand this. So according to this law, statute, whatever it is, the DEA can seize a person's personal property whether or not they're guilty of something, and they have no obligation to give it back? Is that the way?
That's sort of the way it is. Since 1970, there have been laws on the books that allow DEA and other federal officials to seize property based on a suspicion of criminal activity. And they have to ask to get consent. But in many instances, there's pressure, obviously, because you're being asked questions by a federal law enforcement officer. Sometimes the people are young. Of course, sometimes they're criminals, but many times they're not. If consent is granted, then the money is presumed guilty. Then the person who had the goods or the cash taken has to then go into court, which most don't, to prove that they are innocent.
They have to prove their innocence to get back the property that was theirs in the first place.
To the tune of $3.9 billion last year. Under civil forfeiture. Criminal forfeiture, which has a much higher burden of beyond a reasonable doubt conviction, $680 million. So civil forfeiture is the way it's been going for years now, and there's a reason.
That is incredible. So how many people actually go to the trouble of trying to prove their innocence and get their stuff back?
About a sixth of the people who have ever had assets or cash seized challenge the seizure. Now, some of them are criminals, obviously, and oftentimes the goods that are seized are drugs. And in fact, these laws were put into effect to target drug trafficking back in the early 70s. And initially, the officers went after drugs, planes, boats, and cars, any vehicle that was used to transport the drugs. Then the law was expanded to allow them to go after cash. And then, this is key, the law was changed to empower the state and local police departments to do it using the federal laws and to keep 80% of the goods in cash. Then we have various recessions. All of a sudden, this is a new revenue stream for local police departments.
And they count on this as revenue, do they not?
I'm told that about 300 police departments and 210 or so task forces in the United States have gotten more than 20% of their budgets, of their annual budgets, through these forfeitures. That's been going on since 2008.
That is absolutely outrageous.
Now, we know what happened in 2008 is the recession. So this has been a huge boon to the local police departments in the country. Now, there have been changes now, as you probably know, recently.
And I'm imagining that the DEA, though, is counting on that these other 5 of the 6 people that are not going to go to the expense or trouble to try to get their property back.
Well, it's really in many cases, the state and local police departments that are counting on it, because they're the ones who've been looking for ways to raise their revenue stream. However, as you may know, this year there have been changes. Former Attorney General Eric Holder just announced a number of changes, one in January, one in March. So we can talk about that if you wish.
Yeah, let's go through those. What changes did he announce then?
Okay, so in January, he said that state and local authorities cannot do this on their own. For the last, 35 years, they've been able to do it on their own, although, truthfully, most of this has been since the mid-'80s. He said, no longer can you do it on your own. You need to have approval of a federal law enforcement authority, either an assistant U.S. attorney or DEA agent, and it has to be approved by a supervisor. That was done in January to deal with the fact that a lot of these state and local police departments were just going crazy getting money and knowing that in the real world they got to keep most of the money. Just about a month ago, he made another pronouncement. And now, for the first time, federal law enforcement authorities have to have expectation of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There doesn't have to be a conviction. There has to be an expectation of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt and approval of a supervisor within the Justice Department. That was just announced on March 31st. So that changes the dynamic. What will happen, we'll have to see in the real world how it plays out.
Right, right. Well, hopefully that's a step in the right direction. Let me take a step back. So when a person is stopped by a federal agent, in this case a DEA agent, what obligation is an individual under to grant a search? which
None.
might lead to the seizure.
Right. So the answer is there's no need to consent. But many, many people do consent. And you may know of an example of a 22-year-old young man who had $16,000 in cash. He was traveling from his home in Michigan to L.A. to pursue his life dream of starting a video business. And he had both earned that money and gotten some of it from family. He happened to be a minority. And by the way, it's probably not totally coincidental, although I can't prove this, that there's been a disproportionate number of minorities who've been targeted by the forfeiture laws around the country.
You don't say, Richard.
I know that's shocking. I know that's
can't
shocking.
imagine.
But in any event, in this particular case, he happened to be a young minority, and he was the only, apparently, such person in the car he was on. And the DEA agents asked him, can I consent? Can we just consent? He said yes. $16,000 in cash. Why do you have this money, young man? I'm starting a business. Yeah. You don't believe me? Call my mother. They called a woman who it turns out was in fact his mother, and she corroborated the story, and they said, you know what, we're taking the money. How am I going to survive out in Los Angeles? Son, that's not our problem. So no more money. And now he has filed a lawsuit. He is a lawyer. The burden is on the plaintiff.
That is just
Now, if
crazy.
the plaintiff succeeds, he gets legal fees, but most people don't have the
They don't want to go through the
wherewithal,
trouble.
the patience, or the perseverance to bother.
Well, let's hope these announcements that Eric Holder made will at least help in this process.
Hope so. We'll see.
Yeah, Richard Friedman, thank you very much.
Thank you.